There is a moment in every man's life when the veil of comfort is ripped away, revealing the jagged, ugly truth of his existence. And for me, Thomas, that moment didn't happen in a war zone or a hospital waiting room, but in the sun-drenched breakfast nook of my four-bedroom colonial in Westchester, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee in one hand and a stack of legal documents in the other. Documents that effectively told me that the woman I had shared my bed, my breath, and my bank account with for 32 years had been sharpening a knife for my back while I was busy trying to give her the world. I am 68 years old, a retired structural engineer who spent 4 decades calculating load-bearing limits and stress fractures in steel and concrete. Yet I failed to see the structural fatigue in my own marriage until the entire edifice collapsed on top of me less than 12 hours after the greatest stroke of luck a human being can experience. It started on a Tuesday, a day so mundane it almost felt scripted. The kind of day where the sky is a flat, indifferent gray and the only excitement is the hum of the refrigerator. And I had gone to the gas station on the corner of Elm and Main, the one run by a guy named Sal who always asks about my sciatica, to fill up my 2018 Ford F-150 and pick up a gallon of milk because Linda, my wife, had reminded me 3 times that we were out of 2% and she couldn't possibly drink her tea without it. While I was standing at the counter watching Sal scan the milk, I saw the Powerball jackpot flashing on the LED sign above the lottery terminal, $50 million, and on a whim, a pure, unthinking impulse born of habit and a vague desire to dream for a few minutes, I asked for a quick pick. But when I reached for my wallet, I realized I had left my personal debit card on the dresser at home, a mistake that usually results in a mild panic and a return trip. But I remembered I had my business card, the one for Archer Consulting L.L.C., a small, dormant company I kept active for the occasional freelance consulting gig I did to keep my mind sharp and to hide a little bit of money away for a rainy day, or perhaps, subconsciously, for an escape I never admitted I wanted. I swiped the blue corporate card, the receipt printed with the company name, and I tucked the ticket into the designated business expenses pocket of my wallet, not thinking for a second that this specific financial transaction would become the pivot point upon which my entire future would balance. Fast forward to Saturday night, the drawing, a ritual I usually ignored because, let's be honest, the lottery is a tax on people who are bad at math, and I'm very good at math, but Linda was out at her book club. A euphemism I had lately begun to suspect involved more wine and gossip than actual reading, and I was alone in the den with the television on. The numbers came up 4, 12, 28, 33, 49 and the Powerball 7, and I sat there freezing, my heart doing a strange flutter that felt less like joy and more like a medical emergency. As I pulled the crumpled slip of thermal paper from my wallet and checked it once, twice, 10 times, the realization washing over me not like a warm bath but like a bucket of ice water. I had won $50 million. The kind of money that buys islands. The kind of money that buys freedom. My first instinct, the instinct of a man who has been conditioned to be a provider, a partner, a team player for 3 decades, was to call Linda, to scream it into the phone, to tell her that every debt was paid, that we could finally take that cruise around the world, that she could buy the beach house she had been nagging me about for 10 years, but something stopped me. A quiet, insidious voice in the back of my head that sounded a lot like my late father whispering, "Hold your cards, Tommy. Wait until you see the whites of their eyes." So I didn't call, I waited. I sat in the dark, clutching that ticket, listening to the clock on the mantel tick away the seconds of my old life. And when Linda came home at 11:30 p.m., flushed and smelling of expensive Chardonnay and a perfume that seemed slightly stronger than when she left, I just said hello, and she brushed past me with a distracted peck on the cheek, muttering about how tired she was and how Susan's drama was exhausting, never asking how my night was, never noticing that I was trembling, never seeing that her husband was currently holding the keys to the kingdom. I slept with the ticket inside my pillowcase, a restless, feverish sleep where dreams of yachts collided with nightmares of bankruptcy, and I woke up on Sunday morning with a clarity that was terrifying. I walked into the kitchen, the ticket now safely locked in the small fireproof safe in my study, and found Linda making toast, her back to me, the sharp angle of her shoulders radiating a coldness that had become the ambient temperature of our home for the last 5 years. "Linda," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Sit down, I have news." She turned, a look of mild annoyance on her face, as if I were about to tell her the dishwasher was broken again. "Can it wait, Thomas? I have a headache and I need to go to the mall later." "It can't wait," I said, and I told her. I didn't show her the ticket, but I told her the numbers, I told her the amount. I watched her face transform, not gradually but instantly, like a mask slipping off to reveal the predator underneath. Her eyes went wide, the annoyance vanished, replaced by a hunger so raw it made my stomach turn, and she dropped the butter knife, the clatter echoing in the silence. "50 million, she whispered. "We won 50 million. I matched the numbers," I corrected, a distinction she didn't catch. "We're rich." She didn't hug me, she didn't kiss me, she didn't jump up and down. She let out a breath, a long, shuddering exhale, and said, "Finally." That was the word, finally, not wonderful, not "I love you," but finally, as if this was a debt the universe owed her, as if my 40 years of hard work providing an upper-middle-class life were just a preamble to this payday. She spent the rest of the day on her phone, pacing the backyard, talking in hushed tones, telling me she was calling her mother, calling her sister, but I noticed she kept walking to the far edge of the property line whenever I got close. I spent Sunday in a daze, already mourning the simplicity of my life, feeling the weight of the money sitting in the safe like a radioactive isotope. We went to bed early in awkward, silent retirement to our separate sides of the mattress, and I thought foolishly that maybe the shock was just processing, that tomorrow we would plan our future together, that the money would heal the cracks in the foundation. I was wrong. The cracks weren't cracks, they were canyons, and she had already built a bridge to the other side. Monday morning, the morning after the win became real, I was sitting at the table, drinking that coffee, waiting for Linda to come down so we could call a lawyer together, my corporate lawyer, I thought, when the doorbell rang. It was 8:00 a.m., too early for the mail, too early for friends. I opened the door to find a man I didn't know, a thick-necked guy in a cheap suit holding a manila envelope. "Thomas Miller?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "You've been served," he said, thrusting the envelope into my chest and turning to walk away before I could even blink. I stood there, the morning sun hitting my face, and opened the flap. "Petition for dissolution of marriage, divorce papers." I felt the blood drain from my head, a vertigo seizing me, and I read the date on the filing. It was dated, today, filed electronically at 12:01 a.m. this morning. She hadn't been calling her mother yesterday, she had been calling a shark. I turned around to see Linda standing at the top of the stairs, dressed not in her bathrobe but in a sharp gray suit holding a suitcase. Her face was composed, icy, the face of a stranger. "I'm sorry it had to happen this way, Thomas," she said, her voice steady, devoid of any emotion other than a businesslike resolve. "But I'm not waiting anymore, I want out, and I want my half." "Your half?" I stammered, the papers shaking in my hand. "Linda, we just won the lottery. We have everything." "Exactly," she said, walking down the stairs, the wheels of her suitcase clicking on each step like a countdown. "We have assets now, real assets. And under the state laws of equitable distribution, any assets acquired during the marriage are marital property. That ticket is marital property, Thomas. I've already spoken to my attorney. He's filing an emergency injunction to freeze the prize money. You can't touch it, you can't spend it. Half of it is mine, plus alimony, plus the house. You can keep the truck." She stopped at the bottom of the stairs, looking at me with a pity that was worse than hate. "I've been unhappy for years, Thomas. You're boring, you're cheap, you're stuck in your ways. I stayed because, well, because it was comfortable. But now I can be comfortable on my own terms. I'm taking the lump sum. If you have ever looked at the person you vowed to die for and realized they were essentially a sleeper agent waiting for the signal to destroy you, let me know in the comments, because the pain is specific and blinding." She had planned this. She had the exit strategy ready, and the lottery win was just the trigger she pulled. She wasn't leaving because she fell out of love yesterday. She was leaving because she finally had the funding to upgrade. "You did this yesterday?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "While I was sitting here thinking about our future, you were hiring a lawyer to take half of it." "Don't be dramatic," she snapped. "It's just business. We were over anyway. This just speeds up the timeline. My lawyer will be in touch. Don't try to hide the ticket, Thomas. If you destroy it or hide it, you go to jail for fraud. It's already documented." She walked past me, the scent of her perfume making me nauseous, and opened the front door. "Goodbye, Thomas. Enjoy your half. I know I will." And just like that, she was gone. A car was waiting for her at the curb, a black sedan, not a taxi. She had arranged a pickup. I stood in the hallway, the divorce papers in one hand, the memory of 30 years turning to ash in my mouth, and I felt a rage building in my chest, a heat that started in my stomach and radiated out to my fingertips. She wanted half. She wanted to take the luck that had fallen into my lap and use it to fund a life without me, a life she had clearly been fantasizing about while I was working overtime to pay off her credit cards. She thought she had won, she thought she had trapped me. But as I stared at the closed door, a memory flickered in my brain, a small, insignificant detail from Tuesday morning at the gas station. The card, the blue card, Archer Consulting LLC. I dropped the divorce papers on the floor and ran to my study, my heart pounding not with heartbreak anymore, but with the adrenaline of a counterattack. I unlocked the safe and pulled out the ticket. I grabbed the receipt I had stapled to it, a habit from my days as an auditor. There it was, the last 4 digits of the payment method. It matched my business account, my corporate account. I sat down in my leather chair, the leather creaking under my weight, and I started to laugh, a dry, wheezing sound that echoed in the empty house. Linda thought she was divorcing a husband with a winning ticket. She didn't know she was suing an employee of a company that held the asset. You see, Archer Consulting LLC wasn't just a checking account. When I set it up 15 years ago, on the advice of a very paranoid and very brilliant mentor, I had established it as a distinct legal entity with a strict operating agreement, one that explicitly stated that all assets purchased with company funds were the sole property of the corporation, and here was the kicker. The corporation had a key man clause and a board of directors structure, even if the board was just me and my brother. But more importantly, the state we lived in had very specific laws about piercing the corporate veil. If the corporate formalities were maintained, and I was meticulous about them, the assets of the LLC were not personal marital assets, they were business assets, and Linda wasn't a shareholder, she wasn't an officer, she wasn't even an employee, she was nothing to Archer Consulting LLC. She had served divorce papers to Thomas Miller, individual. But Thomas Miller didn't win the Powerball. Archer Consulting did. I picked up the phone. I didn't call a divorce attorney. I dialed the number of Harrison and Stern, the firm that handled my corporate filings. "Harrison," I said when he answered, my voice steady, cold, and calculating. "This is Thomas. I need you to prepare a filing. No, not for a patent. I need you to file a claim for a lottery jackpot on behalf of Archer Consulting LLC." And Harrison. I need you to find every loophole, every bylaw, and every precedent that protects corporate assets from a shareholder's personal domestic litigation, because I'm about to go to war and I intend to keep every single penny. I looked at the empty spot on the wall where our wedding photo used to hang. She must have taken it, or maybe it fell. I didn't care, and I realized that the mourning wasn't over. Linda wanted a divorce. I would give her a divorce. But she forgot the golden rule of engineering. Before you demolish a structure, make sure you aren't standing on the load-bearing beam. She thought she had served me, but she had just declared war on a corporation, and Archer Consulting was about to have a very, very aggressive fiscal year. The drive from my empty, echoing house in Westchester to the glass and steel canyon of Midtown Manhattan, where Harrison and Stern had their offices, was a blur of gray highway and red brake lights, a physical manifestation of the gridlock my life had suddenly become. But as I gripped the steering wheel of my F-150, feeling the leather warm under my palms, I realized that for the first time in 30 years, I wasn't driving toward a job site or a client meeting to put food on the table for a woman who despised me. I was driving toward a war room to protect the only thing I had left. My mind was a chaotic ticker tape of memories and legal strategies, replaying the look on Linda's face, that cold, reptilian satisfaction, when she told me she wanted her half, and every time the image flashed in my mind, it was followed by a surge of bile that tasted like copper and regret. I parked the truck in a garage that charged $40 for 20 minutes, a robbery I would usually complain about. But today, with a lottery ticket worth $50 million tucked into the inside pocket of my blazer right next to my heart, money felt like an abstraction, a weapon rather than a currency. Harrison was waiting for me in a conference room that overlooked the Hudson River, a room that smelled of lemon polish and expensive billable hours, and he looked exactly like the kind of lawyer you want when your life is burning down, sharp, unsentimental, and wearing a suit that cost more than my first mortgage. "Thomas," he said, skipping the pleasantries as he gestured to the leather chair opposite him. "I pulled the corporate filings for Archer Consulting L.L.C. before you arrived. The entity is in good standing. You've paid your annual franchise taxes, you filed your biannual reports, and the operating agreement is, frankly, a thing of beauty. You set this up 15 years ago to shield your consulting liability, correct?" I nodded, pulling the crumpled thermal paper receipt and the signed ticket from my pocket and placing them on the mahogany table with a reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. "I used the company debit card, Harrison. It was in the business expenses slot of my wallet. I was buying milk, yes, but I also bought a ream of printer paper and a box of pens for the home office on the same transaction. The ticket was an impulse add-on, but the funds came directly from the Chase business checking account." Harrison picked up the receipt with a pair of tweezers. The man was theatrical but thorough, and examined it under the desk lamp. "Archer Consulting L.L.C., he read aloud, a slow smile spreading across his face, a smile that looked like a shark sensing blood in the water. "This is interesting, Thomas, very interesting. In New York, marital property is generally defined as anything acquired by either spouse during the marriage. However, corporate assets are distinct entities. If a corporation buys a lottery ticket, the corporation wins the lottery. The shareholder, you, owns the corporation, yes, but the asset itself belongs to the entity. Now, usually a spouse would claim that the value of the corporation increased during the marriage, and therefore she is entitled to half the appreciation. But here's the kicker. Archer Consulting hasn't made a profit in 3 years. It's a dormant asset. Linda has likely listed it as worthless on her mental balance sheet. If we claim the prize through the LLC, the money goes into the corporate account. It doesn't go to Thomas Miller, it goes to Archer." I leaned forward, the adrenaline humming in my veins. "So she can't touch it?" Harrison held up a hand. "It's not that simple. She'll argue that the LLC is your alter ego, that you pierced the corporate veil by using business funds for a personal gamble. She'll say you commingled funds. Did you ever use that card for groceries, for dinner dates, for her shoes?" I thought back, racking my brain. Never. I was paranoid about the IRS. I only used it for office supplies, software subscriptions, and the occasional client lunch. The milk was on the receipt, but I can argue it was for the office break room, my home office. Harrison nodded, impressed. "Good, that's very good. The strict separation of funds is your shield, but to make this ironclad, we need to make Archer Consulting look less like a piggy bank and more like an active decision-making entity. We need minutes, we need a board meeting. We need to ratify the purchase of the ticket as a high-risk investment strategy approved by the company officers." "I'm the only officer," I said. "Not anymore," Harrison replied, opening a folder. "Your operating agreement allows for the appointment of additional officers by the sole member. You need a vice president, someone you trust with your life, someone who isn't Linda. Do you have anyone?" The answer was immediate. "Frank, my younger brother. A retired NYPD detective who lived in Queens, subsisting on a pension and a deep, abiding hatred for the woman who had slowly isolated me from my family over the last 3 decades. Frank had called Linda the Ice Queen to her face at our wedding rehearsal dinner, a comment that earned him a 20-year banishment from our holiday table, but he had never stopped calling me on my birthday. "Call him," Harrison said. "We need to hold an emergency board meeting. Today. Before she finds out about the ticket, because right now she thinks Thomas Miller won, we need to make sure the history books show that Archer Consulting won." I walked out of the office and stood on the windy sidewalk of 6th Avenue to make the call, the noise of the city providing a chaotic soundtrack to the most important conversation of my life. Frank answered on the second ring. "Tommy, everything okay? You sound like you're in a tunnel." I'm in the city, Frank, I said. I need you to meet me. At that diner on 34th, the one with the terrible coffee, it's an emergency. Is it Linda? Frank asked, his voice dropping an octave, instantly shifting into cop mode. Did she finally snap? She served me with divorce papers this morning, I said, and Frank, I won the Powerball. There was a silence on the other end so profound I thought the call had dropped, and then a low whistle. She served you after you won. She thinks I won, I corrected. The ticket belongs to the company. I need you to be my vice president, Frank. I need you to help me protect it. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Frank said, and Tommy, don't sign anything until I get there. I sat in the corner booth of the diner, watching the door, and when Frank walked in looking older, grayer, but just as formidable as the day he turned in his badge, I felt a lump in my throat. We hadn't had a meal together in 5 years because Linda didn't like his energy. I realized then that my poverty wasn't financial, it was relational. I had let that woman rob me of my brother. Frank slid into the booth, not hugging me, just gripping my shoulder hard enough to bruise. Let me see it, he whispered. I showed him the photo of the ticket on my phone. The physical ticket was now in Harrison's safe. Frank stared at it, then at me. 50 large, and she wants have to go run off with her pool boy. I don't think there's a pool boy, I said. But she definitely has a plan. She moved too fast, Frank. The papers were filed at midnight. She had this ready. Frank's eyes narrowed. You're an engineer, Tommy. You look at load limits. I'm a detective. I look at motive. A woman doesn't file at midnight on a Sunday unless she's being coached. Who's she talking to? I don't know, I said. She's been secretive lately. Book club, yoga retreats. I just thought she was bored. Bored women have affairs, Frank grunted. Calculating women have accomplices. We need to find out who she's working with. But first, let's get this company thing sorted. I'm in. What do I have to do? We spent the next hour drafting the corporate minutes on a napkin, which we later formalized at Harrison's office. We appointed Frank as Vice President of Operations for Archer Consulting, backdated the Strategic Investment Initiative resolution, a gray area Harrison warned but defensible given my history of erratic stock purchases, and formally accepted the lottery ticket as a corporate asset. By 4:00 p.m., Archer Consulting was a fortress. But as I left the city to head back to the suburbs, the reality of my personal situation crashed down on me. I stopped at a gas station to buy a bottle of water, my throat parched from the stress. I pulled out my personal debit card, the joint account card. Declined, the cashier said, popping her gum. I tried my personal credit card. Declined. I tried the emergency card I kept in the glove box. Declined. A text message popped up on my phone from my bank. Alert, your accounts have been frozen pursuant to a temporary restraining order filed in Westchester Family Court. She had nuked me. Less than 12 hours after serving me, she had convinced a judge that I was a flight risk with the assets and frozen everything. I had the $500 in cash in my wallet, a tank of gas, and a company that owned $50 million that I couldn't touch yet. I stood there in the gas station, humiliated, while the cashier looked at me like I was a bum, and I realized that this is what it feels like to be erased. She wasn't just leaving me, she was trying to starve me out. She wanted me desperate. She wanted me to come crawling to her, begging to settle, begging to give her the ticket just so I could buy a sandwich. I got back in the truck and drove home, the anger hardening into something cold and sharp like a diamond. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked different. It looked like a crime scene. I unlocked the door, surprised she hadn't changed the locks yet, and walked into the silence. It was deafening. She had taken the good art. She had taken the rug from the foyer, but she had left the dog. Buster, our 10-year-old golden retriever, came trotting up to me, tail wagging, oblivious to the fact that his mom had abandoned him too. Just you and me, buddy, I whispered, kneeling down to hug him, burying my face in his fur to hide the tears that were threatening to spill. She left the best part. I fed the dog and then walked into the kitchen. On the counter where the mail usually sat was a business card. Vance and Associates Matrimonial Law. I knew the name. Vance was a pit bull. He represented the wives of hedge fund managers and CEOs. He was famous for leaving men living in studio apartments while their ex-wives summered in the Hamptons. And next to the card was a note written in Linda's perfect cursive. Thomas, do not try to contact me. Direct all communication to Mr. Vance. We have scheduled a preliminary asset disclosure meeting for Thursday at 10 a.m. Bring the ticket. Elle, bring the ticket, I read aloud. She was so confident. She thought I was just going to hand it over like an obedient puppy. I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. I wasn't going to bring the ticket, I was going to bring a grenade, but Frank's words stuck in my head. Who's she talking to? I went upstairs to our bedroom, my bedroom now. She had cleared out her closet, but in her haste, or perhaps her arrogance, she had been sloppy. I looked at the nightstand. The drawer was empty, but tucked underneath the bed skirt, collecting dust bunnies, was an old iPad. The one she said she lost 6 months ago. I plugged it in. It had 2% battery. It booted up. Passcode. I tried her birthday. No. I tried our anniversary. No. I tried the dog's name. No. Then I tried the date we bought the house. Click. Unlocked. The screen filled with notifications. Emails, texts, photos. I opened the Messages app. It was a graveyard of betrayal. The top thread was with a contact named Gary Financial. Gary, our financial advisor, the man I had played golf with, the man who managed our IRA, the man I trusted with my retirement. I scrolled back. The messages went back a year. Gary, he's clueless, baby. Just wait. The portfolio is doing well, but if you leave now, you only get half. We need a trigger event. Linda, I can't stand him breathing next to me anymore. Can't we just liquidate the 401k? Gary, patience. If we time the divorce right, we can shelter the assets in the trust I set up. Just keep him distracted. And then yesterday, Sunday morning at 6:00 a.m., before I even told her about the lottery, Linda, you won't believe it, he won. He actually won. Powerball, 50 million. Gary, holy SHT, okay, change of plans, don't hug him, don't sign anything, get out of the house, I'm calling Vance, we file immediately. We freeze him before he can hide it. This is it, Linda, this is the jackpot, we're going to be billionaires. I sat on the edge of the bed, the iPad shaking in my hands. It wasn't just greed, it was a conspiracy. My wife and my financial advisor were plotting to steal the lottery win, and worse, they had been sleeping together. There were photos, explicit ones, in my house in my bed while I was at work. The nausea hit me in a wave, and I barely made it to the master bathroom before I threw up. I knelt on the cold tile, wiping my mouth, and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked old, I looked tired, I looked like a victim. But as I stared into my own eyes, I saw the structural engineer waking up. I saw the man who knew that every building has a weak point, and if you hit it hard enough, the whole thing comes down. Gary thought he was smart, Linda thought she was smart, but they had made a critical error. They had documented their conspiracy on a device they left behind. I stood up, rinsed my face, and walked back to the bedroom. I didn't smash the iPad, I didn't delete the messages, I backed them up, I sent them to Frank, I sent them to Harrison, I sent them to a secure cloud server that Linda didn't know existed. This wasn't just a divorce case anymore, this was fraud, this was a breach of fiduciary duty, this was a RICO case waiting to happen. You want a disclosure meeting, I whispered to the empty room. I'll give you a disclosure. Wednesday passed in a blur of preparation. I couldn't buy food, so I ate cans of tuna from the pantry and stale crackers. I couldn't buy gas, so I walked the dog around the neighborhood, ignoring the neighbors who looked at me with pity, clearly having heard the gossip Linda spread. I was the crazy husband who drove her away. I was the villain, let them think that. On Thursday morning, I put on my best suit, the navy blue one I wore to funerals, and I drove into the city to the offices of Vance and Associates. It was a skyscraper on Park Avenue, screaming wealth and intimidation. I walked into the conference room, flanked by Harrison and Frank. Linda was there, sitting at the far end of a glass table that seemed a mile long. She was wearing a white dress, looking angelic and victimized. Gary was sitting next to her, the audacity. He was there as her financial support. He nodded at me, a smug, tight-lipped nod. Thomas, Gary said, good to see you. Difficult circumstances, obviously. I didn't speak. I couldn't trust myself not to leap across the table and strangle him. I sat down. Vance, the shark lawyer, didn't waste time. Mr. Miller, he began, his voice oily and smooth. Let's keep this civil. We know you are in possession of a winning Powerball ticket purchased on Tuesday, November 14th. Under New York State domestic relations law, that ticket is a marital asset. We are prepared to offer a settlement. Ms. Miller will agree to 60-40 split in her favor, citing your emotional neglect and the distress caused by the marriage, and we will waive any claim to your future consulting income. In exchange, you turn over the physical ticket to a neutral escrow agent immediately. Harrison leaned back in his chair, tenting his fingers. That's a generous offer, Mr. Vance. However, there is a factual error in your premise. And what is that? Vance sneered. Mr. Miller did not purchase the ticket, Harrison said calmly. Vance laughed. We have the surveillance footage from the gas station, Harrison. We subpoenaed it yesterday. It clearly shows Thomas Miller buying the ticket. It shows Thomas Miller, the physical person, handing a card to the cashier, Harrison corrected. But the legal purchaser, the entity that paid for the transaction, that was Archer Consulting, L.L.C. Separate legal person. Vance froze. Linda looked confused. Gary frowned, his eyes darting between us. That's a distinction without a difference, Vance snapped. Archer Consulting is a shell. It's Thomas's alter ego. The court will pierce that veil in 5 seconds. I don't think they will, Harrison said, sliding a thick binder across the table. Archer Consulting has been a distinct operating entity for 15 years. It has its own EIN, its own bank accounts, and its own board of directors. In fact, the board met on Tuesday and ratified the investment decision. The ticket is a corporate asset, and since Mrs. Miller is not a shareholder, she has no claim to corporate property. She is entitled to the value of Thomas's shares as of the date of filing. And since the prize hasn't been claimed yet, the book value of the company on Monday morning when you filed was approximately $2,000. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Linda's face went pale. What does that mean? She whispered to Gary. It means, Gary hissed, he's trying to screw us out of the money. I'm not screwing anyone, I said, speaking for the first time, my voice echoing in the room. I'm just following the bylaws, Linda. You wanted business. This is business. You can't do this, Linda screamed, standing up, her angelic mask shattering. It's my money. I put up with you for 30 years. I deserve it. You deserve half of Thomas Miller's assets, I said calmly. But Thomas Miller is broke. You froze his accounts, remember? He can't even buy a sandwich. But Archer Consulting is doing very well. Vance slammed his hand on the table. This is fraud. We will depose you. We will subpoena every record. We will prove that you bought that ticket for yourself. You can try, Harrison said. But while you're doing that, perhaps you should also explain to the court why Mrs. Miller's financial advisor, Mr. Gary Wilson here, was advising her to divorce her husband to trigger a tax event on a jackpot he manages. We have the text messages, Gary, from the iPad Linda left under the bed. Gary's face turned the color of old milk. He stood up so fast his chair tipped over. I have to go. I can't be here. Sit down, Gary, Vance barked. I'm leaving. Gary stammered, grabbing his briefcase. He looked at me, terror in his eyes. He knew I had him on ethics violations, insider conspiracy, and probably SEC fraud. He ran out of the room. Linda watched him go, her mouth open. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear, real fear. She was alone. The plan had crumbled. Now, I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket. If you want a divorce, Linda, we can discuss a settlement, but it won't be 60-40. And it won't include the lottery money. I'm willing to offer you the house, the dog. No, wait, I'm keeping the dog. You can have the house and the Audi, and I'll give you a modest alimony for 5 years. Take it or leave it. I'll sue you to death, Linda shrieked. I'll bury you. You can try, I said, turning to the door where Frank was waiting with a grin on his face. But Archer Consulting has a $50 million legal defense fund, do you? I walked out of the conference room, leaving her screaming at her lawyer, and as the elevator doors closed, I felt a weight lift off my chest. I hadn't won the war yet. Vance would fight, judges were unpredictable, and the corporate veil argument was risky, but I had won the first battle. I had the ticket, I had the company, and I had the truth. But as we walked out onto Park Avenue, Frank grabbed my arm. Tommy, he said, his voice low. Don't celebrate yet, Gary running out like that. That's bad. A guy like that, when he's cornered, he gets desperate. He knows where you live. He knows you have the ticket. I patted my chest pocket where the ticket was no longer resting. It was in a safety deposit box at the bank now. Let him come, I said. I'm done being the nice guy. But I didn't know then that Gary wasn't just a sleazy accountant. I didn't know about his gambling debts. I didn't know that the $50 million wasn't just a payday for him. It was a life-or-death necessity to pay off people who didn't use lawyers to settle disputes. The legal war was just beginning, but the physical danger was about to arrive on my doorstep. The silence in the cab of my Ford F-150 as we drove away from the polished, predatory world of Park Avenue was heavy, not with the awkwardness of estranged brothers, but with the suffocating density of unsaid things and the grim realization that the war I had just declared on my wife was no longer a matter of paperwork and alimony percentages, but something far more visceral and dangerous. Frank sat in the passenger seat, his eyes scanning the side mirrors with the restless, twitchy paranoia of a man who spent 30 years assuming that every car behind him was a shooter. And as we merged onto the FDR Drive, heading north toward the sanctuary of the suburbs, I felt the adrenaline from the conference room begin to curdle into a cold, hard dread that settled in the pit of my stomach like a stone. I kept replaying the look on Gary's face, not the shame of an exposed adulterer, but the sheer animalistic terror of a man who has just watched his last lifeline snap, and I realized that Frank was right, that we weren't dealing with a simple case of greed, but with a desperation so profound it could turn a man into a monster. He's going to run, I said, breaking the silence, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Gary, he ran out of there like the building was on fire. He's going to take whatever money he has access to and disappear. Frank shook his head slowly, never taking his eyes off the rearview mirror. No, Tommy, that wasn't a flight response. That was panic. If he had money to run, he would have left Linda months ago. He stayed because he needed the big score. He needed the 50 million. A guy like that, a guy who pushes a woman to divorce her husband within 12 hours of a lottery win, he's not building a nest egg. He's trying to fill a hole. A deep one, and now that you plugged the hole, the dirt is going to start falling in on him. We drove for a while in silence, the skyline of New York receding behind us, a jagged jaw of steel and glass that had chewed me up and spit me out, and I thought about the house I was returning to, the empty closets, the missing rugs, the silence where my life used to be. I need to go to the bank, I said suddenly. The safety deposit box, the ticket, is it safe? Harrison, my lawyer, had insisted we place the physical ticket in his firm's vault before the meeting, but paranoia is a contagious disease and I was catching it from Frank. Harrison is a vault, Frank grunted. The ticket is fine, you are the liability, you and the house. Listen to me, Tommy, we aren't going back to Westchester tonight to sleep. We're going back to pack, you're coming to Queens, or we find a hotel, but you can't stay in that house alone. It's my house, Frank, I snapped, the stubbornness of the engineer kicking in, the refusal to be displaced from my own foundation. I'm not letting them chase me out. I have a security system. I have the dog. You have a glass door and a security code that your wife knows, Frank countered, his voice hard. And her boyfriend knows it too. Do you think she didn't give it to him? Do you think they didn't plan for this? Change the locks, fine. Change the codes, fine. But a lock only keeps out an honest man, and we are dealing with a desperate one. I didn't argue further because deep down I knew he was right, but the thought of abandoning my home, the place where I had raised a family or thought I had, felt like a surrender I wasn't ready to make. When we finally pulled into the driveway, the sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the lawn that Linda used to obsess over, and the house looked like a mausoleum. We walked inside, and the air was stale, smelling of the expensive lilies Linda kept in the foyer, lilies that were now wilting, brown and curled at the edges, dying just like the marriage. The first thing Frank did was sweep the house. He moved with a silent, practiced efficiency, checking the window latches, looking for signs of entry, checking the landline for bugs, old school he called it, but effective. I went to the kitchen to feed Buster, my golden retriever, who was pacing anxiously by the back door, sensing the disruption in the pack. Clear, Frank called out from the living room, but Tommy, come look at this. I walked into the den, the room where I watched football and where I had checked the winning numbers just 3 days ago. Frank was standing by the sliding glass door that led to the patio. He pointed to the latch. It was unlocked. I locked this, I said, a chill running down my spine. I lock it every night. I checked it before we left this morning. There's no sign of forced entry, Frank said, examining the frame. No scratch marks, no broken glass. Someone used a key or they knew the trick with the shim. They came in, looked around, and left. What did they take? I asked, looking around. The TV was there. My laptop was on the desk. Nothing, Frank said grimly, which means they weren't looking for pawns. They were looking for the ticket, or... He paused, walking over to the bookshelf where I kept my structural engineering journals and tucked behind them a small metal box where I kept emergency cash and spare car keys. The books were slightly askew. Frank pulled them back. The box was gone. They took the contingency fund, I said, feeling sick. There was $5,000 in there and the spare key to the truck. Gary, Frank said, he needs cash fast. He raided the house while we were at the lawyer's office. He knew you'd be gone. He probably tracked your phone or Linda told him the meeting time. Linda wouldn't let him rob me, I protested weakly. Linda is terrified, Tommy, Frank said, grabbing my shoulders. You saw her face. She's not driving the bus anymore. She's a passenger in a car with no brakes. We need to find out what Gary is running from. Frank pulled out his phone and dialed a number I didn't recognize. I'm calling Sully. He still works vice in the precinct where Gary lives. If this guy has debts, Sully will know who holds the paper. While Frank worked the phones, I went into engineer mode. I couldn't fix the marriage, but I could reinforce the structure. I went to the garage and grabbed my drill, a box of 3-inch screws, and a set of heavy-duty slide bolts I had bought for a project a year ago and never used. I spent the next 2 hours turning my home into a fortress. I reinforced the strike plates on every exterior door with 3-inch screws that would anchor them into the studs, making them virtually kick-proof. I installed the slide bolts on the top and bottom of the back doors. I cut a piece of timber to wedge into the sliding glass door track. It was physical labor, the kind that makes your muscles burn and your mind quiet down. And for a moment, listening to the whir of the drill and the bite of the screw into wood, I felt like myself again, not a lottery winner, not a victim, but a man who builds things that stand up to pressure. By the time I finished, it was dark and Frank was sitting at the kitchen table, a notepad in front of him, looking like he had just seen a ghost. Sit down, Tommy, he said. We have a problem. I sat, wiping sawdust from my hands. What did Sully say? Gary Wilson, Frank began, reading from his notes, is technically a financial advisor, but his license has been under review for 6 months for irregularities in client accounts. He's been churning stocks, generating commissions to cover losses, but that's the white-collar stuff. The real problem is where he spends his nights. Frank tapped the paper. He's a regular at an underground poker room in Atlantic City. And he bets on sports heavy. Sully ran his name through a few CIs. Word on the street is that Gary is into the Russians for $2 million. $2 million, I gasped. How does a financial advisor lose $2 million? Greed, Frank said, and stupidity. He started doubling down to win it back. The loan sharks he's dealing with, they aren't banks, Tommy. They don't send overdue notices. They send guys with baseball bats, and apparently the deadline for payment was last week. He bought himself an extension by telling them he had a whale client coming into a massive windfall. I stared at Frank, the pieces falling into place like a bridge collapsing in slow motion. Me, I whispered, I'm the whale. Exactly, Frank said. He told them he had access to $50 million, that he was going to marry the winner, or rather the winner's ex-wife, and pay them off with interest. That's why he pushed Linda to file so fast. That's why he wanted the assets frozen. He needed to show the sharks proof that the money was locked up and coming to him. But today you blew that up. You told him the money belongs to the L.L.C. You told him Linda gets nothing, which means he has nothing to give the Russians. So he's dead, I said, feeling a strange lack of sympathy. If he doesn't pay, they kill him. Eventually, Frank said, but desperate men do desperate things before they die. He knows you have the ticket, or he thinks you do. Or he thinks he can force you to sign over the L.L.C. rights. Tommy, if he can't get the money through the divorce court, he's going to try to get it through leverage. And the only leverage he has is, well, me, kidnapping, Frank said flatly, extortion, breaking your legs until you sign a transfer order. These guys aren't sophisticated, and Gary is terrified enough to lead them right to your door. That's why the house was tossed. He was looking for liquid cash to buy time, or maybe he was looking for a way to get to you. Pause for a moment. If you found out that the man who stole your wife was also planning to hand you over to the mob to save his own skin, would you run or would you stand your ground? Because in that moment, sitting in my fortified kitchen with my brother, I realized that running would only delay the inevitable. I had the high ground, I had the fortified position, and I had Frank. Not leaving, I said again, but this time with a cold certainty. If they come here, we'll be ready, but Frank, what about Linda? Frank looked at me with pity. What about her? She made her choice. She doesn't know, I said. She thinks he's a rich financial advisor. She thinks they're running off into the sunset. She doesn't know she's sleeping with a man who has a target on his back if the Russians come for him and she's standing next to him. Collateral damage, Frank said. It happens. I can't let that happen, I said, standing up. I hate her for what she did. I hate her for the betrayal, but I spent 30 years protecting her. I can't just let her be murdered because she's an idiot. Tommy, don't, Frank warned. Do not call her. I have to, I said, pulling out my phone. I dialed Linda's number. It went straight to voicemail. She had blocked me. I tried calling the house line. Maybe she had gone to her mother's. No answer. I called her sister, Susan. Susan, I said when she answered, breathless. Where is Linda? Thomas, Susan sounded icy. I'm not supposed to talk to you, her lawyer said. Forget the lawyer, I shouted. This is life or death, Susan. Linda is in danger. Gary is not who she thinks he is. He owes money to the mob. If she is with him, she is in the crossfire. Where is she? I don't know, Susan stammered, hearing the fear in my voice. She said they were going to a hotel in the city, the pier, I think. She wanted to celebrate the filing. The peer, I repeated. Okay, call her, keep calling her, tell her to leave him, tell her to go to the police, tell her to come home, just get her away from him. I hung up and looked at Frank. The pier, Fifth Avenue. You're not going there, Frank said, standing up to block my path. You are not going into the city to save the woman who is trying to bankrupt you. I'm not going to save her marriage, I said. I'm going to save her life. And then I'm going to divorce her, but I need her alive to sign the papers, don't I? Frank stared at me for a long moment, then sighed, grabbing his jacket. You're a stubborn son of a bitch, Tommy. Always were. Let's go, but I'm driving, and I'm bringing my piece. Frank had a concealed carry permit, retired NYPD privileges. I didn't ask if he had the gun on him. I assumed he always did. We got back into the truck, the night now fully dark, and drove back toward the city we had just fled. The irony wasn't lost on me, driving into the heart of danger to rescue the villain of my story. But as we drove, my phone buzzed, a text message, unknown number, I have her. If you want to see her again, bring the ticket to the warehouse on Pier 42. Midnight, come alone. If you call the cops, she dies. Attached was a photo. It was Linda. She was sitting on a chair, her hands zip-tied behind her back, duct tape over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. She wasn't at the pier. The background looked industrial, rusted metal, concrete. He has her, I whispered, showing the phone to Frank. Gary took her. Frank glanced at the photo and swore, Pier 42, that S abandoned. It's a trap, Tommy. He's going to trade her for the ticket, and then he's going to kill both of you to eliminate the witnesses. The Russians probably gave him an ultimatum, get the money or we take it out of your hide, so he grabbed the closest leverage he had. We have to go, I said. We have to give him the ticket. Are you insane? Frank shouted. First of all, the ticket is in a bank vault. We can't get it at 10 p.m. Second, you don't negotiate with terrorists. We call the SWAT team. If we call SWAT and they see sirens, he kills her, I said, my mind racing, calculating the variables like a load-bearing equation. We need a diversion. We need to make him think we're playing his game. I have an idea, Frank said, his eyes narrowing. You said you backed up the text messages, the ones proving his fraud? Yes. And Harrison said the L.L.C is the owner of the ticket? Yes. Okay, Frank said, merging onto the highway with a surge of speed. We don't bring the ticket. We bring the corporate resolution. We bring a stack of papers that looks like a transfer of ownership. Gary is a finance guy, but he's desperate. He'll want to sign something. We buy time, and while you're talking to him, I flank him. You're one guy, Frank. He might have muscle. I'm not just one guy, Frank grinned, a wolfish, dangerous grin. I still have friends in the precinct. Pier 42 is in the 7th precinct. I know the night commander. We don't call SWAT with sirens. We call a silent approach. But Tommy, you have to be the bait. You have to walk into that warehouse alone. I looked at the photo of Linda again. She looked pathetic, stripped of her arrogance, stripped of her greed. She was just a frightened woman who had made a terrible mistake. I'll do it, I said. I'll walk in. We arrived at the perimeter of Pier 42 at 11:45 p.m. It was a desolate stretch of waterfront, the skeletal remains of old shipping terminals looming against the night sky. Frank parked the truck 3 blocks away. I'm going to circle back, he whispered. I'll be listening on your phone. Keep the line open in your pocket. Don't engage him physically. Just talk. Keep him talking. Finance guys love to hear themselves talk. I nodded, straightened my blazer, and grabbed the manila folder we had stuffed with blank paper and old tax returns. I walked toward the dark maw of the warehouse, the wind off the East River cutting through my clothes. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm that defied all my engineering precision. I stepped into the warehouse. It was cavernous, lit by a single construction light in the center. Gary was there. He was pacing, holding a gun, a small silver pistol that looked shaking in his hand. Linda was tied to a chair in the center of the light pool. She saw me and she started making muffled noises behind the tape, her eyes pleading. Stop right there, Gary shouted, pointing the gun at me. Hands where I can see them. Did you bring it? I brought it, I said, holding up the folder. It's all here, Gary, the ticket, the transfer documents, the corporate seal. Kick it over, Gary screamed. He looked terrible, sweating, pale, his tie undone. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. I can't just kick it over, I said, walking slowly forward, keeping my movements deliberate. You need to sign the transfer, Gary. If you take the ticket without the corporate resolution, the lottery commission won't cash it. They'll flag it as stolen. You know how compliance works. You need the chain of title. It was bullshit, total bullshit. But I spoke with the authority of a CEO, using the jargon he understood. Gary hesitated. The logic pierced his panic for a second. Don't mess with me, Thomas. I'll shoot her. If you shoot her, I said calmly, stepping into the light, you go to prison for murder. Right now you're just looking at kidnapping and fraud. You can walk away from this, Gary. Take the folder, sign the papers, leave the country. Linda and I, we won't press charges. We just want this over. Linda's eyes went wide. She knew I was lying. She knew I would hunt him to the ends of the earth. But Gary wanted to believe it. He wanted a way out. Put the folder on the ground, Gary ordered, and back away. I placed the folder on the concrete floor about 10 feet from him. Okay, Gary, it's yours. $50 million. Just let her go. Gary lunged for the folder, his greed overriding his tactical sense. He grabbed it, tucking the gun under his arm to rip it open. He saw the tax returns. He saw the blank paper. What is this? He screamed, looking up. This is trash. It's a distraction, I said. And then the warehouse lights, the main overhead flood slammed on with a blinding intensity. Frank had found the breaker box. Police, drop the weapon, Frank's voice boomed from the catwalk above, amplified by the acoustics of the empty space. Gary shrieked, spinning around, raising the gun blindly toward the ceiling. No, I need the money. Drop it, Gary, I yelled, diving toward Linda to shield her with my body. Crack, the gun went off. I felt a stinging burn on my shoulder, like a hornet sting magnified by 1,000. I hit the floor, covering Linda, hearing the chair clatter as we toppled over. Boom, boom, two louder shots echoed from above. Frank's service weapon. I looked up. Gary dropped the pistol. He staggered back, clutching his leg, then collapsed to the ground, screaming. My leg, you shot my leg, stay down, Frank yelled, running down the metal stairs, followed by four uniformed officers who had slipped in through the back. I lay there on the cold concrete, the smell of gunpowder and river water in my nose, and looked at Linda. I ripped the tape off her mouth. Thomas, she sobbed, her face pressed against my chest, right next to the blazer pocket where the blood was starting to seep through. You came, you actually came. I did, I wheezed, the pain in my shoulder starting to throb, but don't get used to it. The paramedics arrived minutes later. The bullet had grazed my deltoid, a flesh wound, painful but not life-threatening. Gary was cuffed and loaded onto a stretcher, still weeping about his debts. Linda was treated for shock. As I sat on the back of the ambulance, a paramedic bandaging my shoulder, Frank walked over looking grim but satisfied. You okay, hero? I'll live, I said. Did they get him? Gary is done, Frank said. Attempted murder, kidnapping, extortion. He's going away for a long time. The Russians won't be able to touch him in Sing Sing. I looked over at Linda. She was sitting in the back of a police cruiser giving a statement. She looked small, broken. She looked up and met my eyes. She started to get out of the car, walking toward me. Thomas, she said, stopping a few feet away. Thank you. I don't know what to say. I was so wrong about everything. Gary, he tricked me. He manipulated me. He did, I said, standing up, wincing slightly. But you let him in, Linda. You opened the door. I know, she whispered, reaching for my hand. But we can fix this, can't we? I realized tonight, sitting in that chair, that money doesn't matter. You matter. We survived this. It's a sign. Let's drop the divorce. Let's just go home. I looked at her hand, the hand that had signed the divorce papers, the hand that had texted Gary about waiting for me to die or leave. I looked at her face and I saw the hope there, but I also saw the calculation. She knew Gary was gone. She knew the lottery money was safe. And she knew that staying married to me was now her only path to the fortune. I thought about the house, the fortified doors, the dog, the silence that I had started to enjoy. No, Linda, I said, my voice steady and final. We can't fix this. You tried to destroy me. You tried to take everything, and tonight I saved your life. That is my final gift to you. The debt is paid. What? She stammered, tears welling up. But I love you. You love the lifestyle, I said. And the lifestyle is under new management. The divorce proceeds. My lawyer will be in touch. I turned to Frank. Let's go home. To the house, Frank asked. To the house, I said. I have some locks to change. I walked away, leaving her standing on the pier, the flashing lights illuminating the end of 30 years. I was injured, I was exhausted, and I was alone. But as I climbed into the truck, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. I felt free. And I still had $49,995,000 waiting for me. Archer Consulting was open for business. The fluorescent lights of the hospital emergency room have a specific hum, a low-frequency drone that seems to vibrate right against your skull when you are coming down from an adrenaline overdose. And as I sat on the edge of the gurney shirtless, with a young resident stitching up the furrow the bullet had plowed through my deltoid, I realized that the physical pain was actually a relief because it was singular, localized, and understandable, unlike the sprawling, cancerous mess my life had become in the last 72 hours. My name is Thomas, and if you think saving your wife from a kidnapper automatically fixes a broken marriage, you clearly haven't met Linda, because while I was bleeding on the concrete floor of that warehouse, thinking I had done the noble thing, the honorable thing, the machinery of her survival instinct was already recalibrating, shifting gears from damsel in distress back to plaintiff. And the speed with which that woman could pivot from victimhood to villainy would have been impressive if it wasn't so sociopathic. Frank was standing in the corner of the trauma bay, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, looking like a gargoyle who had seen too much sin for one lifetime, and he watched as the nurse applied the final bandage to my shoulder. You know what comes next, Tommy, Frank said, his voice low enough so the doctors couldn't hear. The honeymoon period lasted exactly as long as the ambulance ride. I saw her talking to Vance on the phone in the waiting room. She was crying, but it wasn't the thank God I'm alive cry. It was the how do we spin this cry. I buttoned my blood-stained shirt, wincing as the fabric pulled against the stitches, and nodded because I knew he was right. Linda was a creature of comfort, and having lost her golden parachute with Gary, who was currently cuffed to a bed in the ICU under armed guard, she was now staring down the barrel of a life without the $50 million she felt entitled to, and a cornered narcissist fights harder than a cornered rat. We left the hospital at 3:00 a.m., avoiding the few press photographers who had caught wind of the lottery kidnapping on the police scanner, and retreated to my fortress of a house where I slept for 12 hours straight, a comatose slumber induced by exhaustion and painkillers. When I woke up on Friday afternoon, the world had changed again, or rather the narrative had, because when I turned on the television in the kitchen while brewing a pot of coffee with one hand, I saw Linda's face plastered across the screen. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't recovering in private. She was giving an exclusive interview to a local news anchor, looking bruised, fragile, and utterly sympathetic. I was vulnerable, she was saying to the camera, dabbing a dry eye with a tissue. My husband. Thomas, he had become so distant after the lottery win. He became obsessed with the money. He locked it away in a corporate account. I felt abandoned. Gary, Mr. Wilson, he preyed on that. He groomed me. He made me think he was helping me get my fair share, but then he turned into a monster. I am just so grateful Thomas saved me, but the trauma. I don't know if I can ever feel safe again in that marriage. The money destroyed us. I stared at the screen, the coffee mug shaking in my hand. She was rewriting history in real time. She was painting herself as the victim of my greed, claiming my obsession with the corporate account drove her into the arms of a kidnapper, conveniently omitting the text messages where she conspired to divorce me before I even told her about the corporate structure. She was laying the groundwork for the jury. She was setting the stage to claim that even if she didn't deserve the money legally, she deserved it morally as compensation for her suffering. I turned off the TV and threw the remote onto the counter, the plastic cracking. "She's good," Frank said, walking in from the backyard with the dog. "I'll give her that. She's spinning the financial abuse angle. She's going to claim you used the LLC to hide marital assets and that drove her to make poor decisions under duress." "It won't work," I said, my voice gravelly. "We have the texts, we have the proof of conspiracy." "In court, maybe," Frank said, "but in the court of public opinion, you're the rich miser who hoarded the ticket and she's the poor wife who got kidnapped. Vance is going to use that pressure to force a settlement. He's going to say, give her 20 million and this ugly story goes away." "I don't care about the story," I said, pouring the coffee. "Let them talk. I'm going to court." And go to court we did. The hearing for the preliminary injunction regarding the asset of Archer Consulting LLC was scheduled for Tuesday, 4 days after the shooting. The weekend was a blur of preparation. Harrison, my corporate lawyer, flew in a specialist in equitable distribution named Sarah Jenkins, a terrifyingly sharp woman who looked at divorce cases like mathematical equations. We sat in my dining room, Frank, Harrison, Sarah, and me, surrounded by boxes of documents. "Here is the battlefield," Sarah said, laying out a diagram. "Vance is going to argue piercing the corporate veil. He will claim that Archer Consulting is a sham, an alter ego of Thomas Miller. He will cite the fact that you are the sole member, that the company had no revenue for 3 years, and that the purchase of the lottery ticket was an anomaly inconsistent with the company's business purpose. If the judge agrees the LLC is disregarded, the ticket becomes your personal property and boom, it's a marital asset subject to 50-50 division." "And how do we stop that?" I asked, rubbing my throbbing shoulder. "By proving the LLC is a distinct functioning organism," Harrison said. "We need to show that you treated it like a separate person." "Did you hold annual meetings?" "Yes," I said. "I sign the minutes every January." "Did you commingle funds?" Sarah asked. "Did you ever pay the mortgage with the business account? Did you ever buy groceries with it?" "Never," I said. "Only business expenses, the milk on the receipt, that's the only weak link." "We can argue the milk was for the office kitchenette," Harrison said, "but we need more. We need to show that the investment in the lottery ticket was a rational corporate decision." "It wasn't rational," I admitted. "It was a hunch." "In business, a hunch is called speculative venture capital," Sarah smiled. "We need to frame it as a high-risk, high-reward strategy authorized by the bylaws." "Frank, as the new VP, have you ratified the purchase?" "Signed and sealed," Frank said. "Good, but Vance has a wild card," Sarah warned. "The kidnapping. He's going to argue that your negligence in securing the asset put Linda in danger and therefore you owe her damages. It's a tort claim wrapped inside a divorce case. It's messy." "Let it be messy," I said. "I'm not settling." Tuesday morning arrived with a gray, oppressive drizzle, fitting weather for a demolition derby. I wore my sling over my suit jacket, not for sympathy but because I physically couldn't get my arm into the sleeve. We arrived at the Westchester County Courthouse to a swarm of reporters. The lottery kidnapping was national news now. "Mr. Miller, is it true you hid the ticket from your wife? Did you hire the kidnapper? Are you keeping the money?" The questions were shouted like accusations. I ignored them, marching up the steps with Frank flanking me like a bodyguard. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Linda was already at the plaintiff's table, looking frail and traumatized, wearing a neck brace that I strongly suspected was a prop, considering the doctors had cleared her of any spinal injury. Vance sat next to her, looking like a vulture who had just spotted a fresh carcass. The judge, the Honorable Justice Margaret O'Malley, was a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for shredding unprepared lawyers. She banged the gavel and the room went silent. "We are here to determine the status of the asset known as the Powerball jackpot ticket," Judge O'Malley said. "Mr. Vance, you filed the emergency motion. You have the floor." Vance stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor," he began, his voice booming with theatrical outrage. "This case is a classic example of financial fraud disguised as corporate maneuvering. Mr. Thomas Miller, the husband, purchased a lottery ticket. He won. And then, in a panicked attempt to defraud his wife of 32 years, he constructed a flimsy, retroactive narrative that a dormant consulting company, a shell with 0 employees and 0 revenue, was the actual purchaser. He is hiding behind a corporate veil to starve his wife, a woman who has just survived a brutal kidnapping partially caused by his secrecy. We ask the court to pierce the veil, declare the ticket a marital asset, and order an immediate distribution of 50% to Mrs. Miller." It was a good speech, simple, emotional. The gallery murmured in agreement. I looked at Linda. She was wiping her eyes, playing the part perfectly. Judge O'Malley looked at me. "Mr. Harrison, your response." Harrison stood up, calm, precise. "Your Honor, the plaintiff's narrative is compelling fiction but legally bankrupt. Archer Consulting LLC was incorporated 15 years ago. It has filed tax returns every year. It has a separate EIN. It has separate bank accounts. The ticket in question was purchased with a corporate debit card drawing on corporate funds. Mr. Miller did not spend marital money. He spent company money. Under New York law, a corporation is a legal person. That person won the lottery. Mrs. Miller is not a shareholder. She is not an officer. She has no standing to claim corporate assets. As for the sham argument, we have entered into evidence 15 years of corporate minutes, ledgers, and filings that show impeccable corporate formalities. Mr. Miller may be the sole member, but he has never treated the company as his piggy bank. And because he respected the corporate form, this court must respect it too. The judge flipped through the binder Harrison had submitted. She peered over her glasses. Mr. Harrison, you are arguing that a consulting firm bought a Powerball ticket as a business strategy. Yes, Your Honor, Harrison said without blinking. Companies engage in speculative investments all the time. Hedge funds buy derivatives, tech companies buy crypto. Archer Consulting bought a probability asset. It paid off. It's absurd, Vance shouted. It's a loophole. It's the law, Harrison countered. And frankly, Your Honor, Mrs. Miller's claim to equity is severely damaged by her own conduct. We have evidence that Mrs. Miller conspired with her financial advisor, the very man who kidnapped her, to divorce Mr. Miller specifically to seize this asset before he was even aware of her intentions. She comes to this court with unclean hands. Objection, Vance roared. Relevance. The kidnapping is a tragedy, not a conspiracy. We have the text messages, Your Honor, Harrison said, lifting a flash drive. Recovered from Mrs. Miller's iPad, they detail a plan to trigger a divorce immediately upon the win. This wasn't a marriage ending, it was a heist beginning. Judge O'Malley's eyes narrowed. I will review the evidence in chambers, but first I want to hear from Mr. Miller. Take the stand. This was it, the trap. Vance wanted me on the stand to make me look angry, controlling, and unlikable. I walked to the witness box, took the oath, and sat down. My shoulder throbbed. Vance approached me like a tiger. Mr. Miller, he said, let's talk about Tuesday morning. You went to the gas station, you bought milk, you bought a ticket. Did you call a board meeting before you bought that ticket? No, I said, I am the managing member. Have unilateral decision-making authority for purchases under $500. Convenient, Vance smirked. And tell me, why did you use the business card? Was it because you ran out of personal cash? No, I said, it was in the front slot of my wallet. So it was an accident, Vance pounced. A mistake, you meant to buy it personally, but oops, you used the wrong card. If I said yes, the corporate argument died. If I said it was an accident, the asset was mine personally. It was a binary trap. I looked at Linda. I looked at the smug look on Vance's face. No, I said clearly, it was not an accident. I used the Archer Consulting card because I treat Archer Consulting as my primary vehicle for wealth generation. My personal account is for household expenses. My business account is for growth. A lottery ticket is an attempt at growth. I made a conscious choice to use corporate funds for a corporate risk. You're lying, Vance snapped. You're making this up to cheat your wife. I'm telling you how I run my business, I said. And as for cheating my wife, Mr. Vance, I just took a bullet for her. I paid the ultimate price to save her from the consequences of her own affair. If I wanted to cheat her, I would have let Gary pull the trigger. The courtroom gasped. Vance froze. I had gone off script, but I had touched the third rail of the case. Move to strike, Vance yelled, argumentative. Overruled, Judge O'Malley said, looking at me with a new intensity. The witness answers the question of intent. Mr. Miller, are you telling this court that you value the integrity of your limited liability company more than your marital estate? I am telling the court, I said, leaning forward, that my marriage was a lie for the last 5 years, but my company has always been honest. The company follows the rules. The company doesn't sleep with my financial advisor. The company didn't serve me divorce papers 12 hours after I won. So yes, Your Honor, I protect the company because the company is the only thing in this equation that hasn't betrayed me. Silence, absolute silence. Linda looked down at the table. Vance looked like he had swallowed a bug. Judge O'Malley sat back, tapping her pen. Court is adjourned for 2 hours while I review the electronic evidence, she said. Don't go far. The 2 hours felt like 2 years. We sat in the hallway benches. Frank went to get sandwiches. I just stared at the floor. Linda didn't come out of the courtroom. She stayed inside with Vance. Finally, the bailiff called us back in. The judge took the bench. She looked tired. She looked at Linda, then at me. I have reviewed the text messages provided by the defense, Judge O'Malley began. They paint a very disturbing picture. They show a clear, premeditated conspiracy between Mrs. Miller and Mr. Wilson to manipulate the divorce proceedings to maximize financial gain. Mrs. Miller, your claim that you were driven to Mr. Wilson by your husband's neglect is contradicted by your own words. You refer to Mr. Miller as the mark. You discuss hiding assets. You mock his career. It is, quite frankly, disgusting. Linda shrank in her seat. Vance rubbed his temples. However, the judge continued, this is a court of law, not a court of morals. The question is the ownership of the ticket. I have reviewed the corporate filings of Archer Consulting L.L.C. They are meticulous. Mr. Miller has maintained a strict separation of assets for 15 years. The purchase was made with corporate funds. The corporation is a valid legal entity in New York. Therefore, I find that the Powerball ticket is the sole property of Archer Consulting L.L.C. Harrison let out a breath. Frank squeezed my knee. I felt my heart restart. But the judge raised a finger. Mr. Miller owns 100% of the membership interests in Archer Consulting. Those membership interests are marital property as the company was formed during the marriage. Therefore, the value of the company, including the ticket, is subject to equitable distribution. Vance perked up. He grinned. He thought he had one on the back end. However, the judge said, her voice dropping to a steely register, New York is an equitable distribution state, not a community property state. Equitable does not mean equal, it means fair. And in determining what is fair, the court can consider the conduct of the parties, specifically wasteful dissipation of assets and egregious conduct. She looked at Linda. Mrs. Miller, you conspired to defraud the marital estate. You engaged in an affair that led to the kidnapping of yourself and the shooting of your husband. You drained joint accounts to fund Mr. Wilson's gambling debts. Yes, I saw the transfers in the forensic audit. This conduct is egregious. It shocks the conscience of the court. To award you 50% of this windfall would be a miscarriage of justice. She picked up her gavel. Therefore, the court orders the following. The lottery winnings remain the property of Archer Consulting L.L.C. In the division of the marital value of Mr. Miller's shares in said company, the court awards Mrs. Miller 0%. The courtroom erupted. Vance jumped up. Your Honor, that is reversible error. You can't zero her out. I just did, O'Malley snapped. She gets the house, she gets her personal vehicle, she keeps her own jewelry, and she gets no alimony as she is capable of working and her conduct bars her from support. Mr. Miller retains 100% of Archer Consulting and its assets. The divorce is granted on the grounds of cruel and inhuman treatment. Case closed. She banged the gavel. The sound rang out like a gunshot, but this time nobody was bleeding. I sat there, stunned. 0%. I had expected a fight. I had expected to lose 10, maybe 20 million, but zero. It was total victory. It was the climax of the legal war, and the enemy had been annihilated. Linda didn't scream, she didn't cry, she just sat there, frozen, staring at the judge as if she couldn't understand the language. She had gambled everything, her marriage, her safety, her reputation on a big payday, and she had lost it all. She turned to look at me, her eyes hollow. Thomas, she whispered across the aisle. What am I going to do? I stood up, adjusting my sling. I looked at the woman who had been my wife. I didn't feel hate anymore. I didn't even feel pity. Felt the indifference of a stranger. You have the house, Linda, I said. I suggest you sell it. The property taxes are due in November. I turned and walked out of the courtroom, Frank and Harrison flanking me. We walked through the gauntlet of reporters, but I didn't stop. I didn't give a quote. I just walked to the truck. You did it, Tommy, Frank said, slamming the door. You actually did it. You beat the system. The system worked, Frank, I said, leaning my head back against the seat. System worked because I respected it. I kept the records. I followed the rules, and she didn't. So what now? Frank asked as he started the engine. You have $50 million. You have no wife. You have a hole in your shoulder. What's the play? I looked out the window at the gray sky, which was starting to break, revealing a sliver of blue. First, I said, I need to go to the office. The office? You mean the spare room in the house you just gave her? No, I smiled. I mean the new office. Archer Consulting is expanding, Frank. We need a headquarters, and I think I'm going to buy the building Vance rents his office in just for fun. But as we drove away, a notification popped up on my phone. It wasn't a text. It was an email from the New York Lottery Commission. Subject, claim appointment confirmation. It was time to cash the ticket, but below that was another email from an unknown sender. Subject, you think Gary worked alone? I stared at the screen. The text was simple. Gary was a middleman. The money he owed wasn't to Russians, it was to us. And we know you have the ticket now. Expect a visit. I felt the cold dread seep back in. The legal war was over. The marital war was over. But the criminal war had just escalated. I showed the phone to Frank. He read it and sighed, reaching for his holster. The notification on my phone screen glowed with a malevolent green light in the dim cab of the truck. A digital specter that transformed my victory lap into a funeral procession before the confetti had even hit the ground. And as Frank read the threat, expect a visit, I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten, the old cop instincts overriding the joy of the legal win, replacing it with the grim calculation of a soldier realizing the war has simply moved from the courtroom to the street. We didn't go back to the house in Westchester because a fortress with one defender is a trap, and instead we drove north deep into the Catskills to a cabin Frank owned, a bug-out location he had bought with his pension years ago for exactly this kind of worst-case scenario, a place where the driveway was a mile long and the only neighbors were black bears and silence. I spent that first night sitting in a worn armchair by a wood stove, my wounded shoulder throbbing in time with my heartbeat, watching Frank clean his service weapon on the kitchen table, the smell of gun oil mixing with the scent of old pine, and I realized that $50 million doesn't just buy you freedom. It puts a price tag on your head that every predator in a 1,000-mile radius can read. The unknown sender wasn't a mystery to Frank. He made 3 calls on a burner phone and confirmed what we suspected. Gary hadn't borrowed from a street corner loan shark. He had borrowed from a syndicate that ran high-stakes underground gambling rings in Jersey, a group that operated with the efficiency of a corporation and the brutality of a butcher shop. And they didn't care that Gary was in jail. They only cared that their ledger was in the red. They knew I had the ticket, or rather, they knew I controlled the L.L.C that held the ticket, and in their binary worldview, debt is inherited by whoever holds the assets. The next morning, waking up to the smell of coffee and the sound of rain on the tin roof, I made a decision that terrified Frank but made perfect sense to the engineer in me. You don't solve a structural instability by ignoring it, and you don't solve a debt by running away. I wasn't going to live the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for a car bomb or a sniper. I was going to treat this extortion exactly like I treated the divorce, as a transaction. Call them, I told Frank as he poured eggs onto a plate. Call the number that texted me, tell them I want a meeting. Frank dropped the spatula. Tommy, are you suicidal? You don't invite these people to tea. We call the FBI. We get witness protection. I just spent 40 years in a prison of a marriage, I said, standing up and testing the range of motion in my bad arm. I am not spending my golden years in a witness protection program in Nebraska eating bland food and pretending to be a retired plumber. I am Thomas Miller, CEO of Archer Consulting, and I am going to negotiate a settlement. Frank argued for an hour, but eventually he saw the logic, or maybe he just recognized the stubbornness that runs in our bloodline, so he made the call. The meeting was set for neutral ground, not a warehouse, not a dark alley, but the conference room of Harrison's law firm in Midtown Manhattan at 2:00 p.m. the next day, a location with cameras, security guards, and witnesses. It was a power move. I was telling them I wasn't hiding in the shadows, I was standing in the light. Drove back into the city, the skyline looking less like a threat and more like a chessboard, and when we walked into that conference room, Harrison looked like he was about to have a stroke when I explained who was coming to visit. "You invited organized crime into my firm," he hissed, adjusting his tie. "This is highly irregular, Thomas." "It's a creditor meeting," I said calmly, taking my seat at the head of the table. "They think they have a claim on the asset. I'm going to clarify their position." At exactly 2:00 p.m., two men walked in. They didn't look like movie gangsters, they looked like actuaries who hit the gym too much. Expensive suits, dead eyes, manicured hands, no weapons visible. This was the corporate face of the underworld. The leader, a man who introduced himself only as Mr. K, sat opposite me and smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice smooth. "We appreciate the invitation. Usually we have to knock quite hard to get attention. We understand you have come into a significant liquidity event." "I have," I said, keeping my hands on the table, "and I understand you have a non-performing loan with a Mr. Gary Wilson." "Mr. Wilson is unavailable," Mr. K said, "but the debt remains $2 million plus VIG. We feel that since you have acquired the asset Mr. Wilson promised us, you have effectively acquired his liability. It's a matter of equity." "It's extortion," Frank growled from the corner, his hand near his hip. Mr. K ignored him. "We prefer to call it a transfer of responsibility. If we don't get paid, Mr. Miller, we will have to pursue collection actions, and our collection agents are very persistent. Accidents happen, houses burn down, lottery winners have a statistically high rate of misfortune." It was a direct threat wrapped in velvet. I looked him in the eye. "Here's the reality, Mr. K. Gary lied to you. I didn't acquire his asset. I acquired my own asset. Gary was a leech. However, I am a businessman. I want to enjoy my retirement without looking in the rearview mirror, so here is my offer." I slid a check across the table. It was a cashier's check drawn on the personal account I had managed to unfreeze that morning by selling my Audi. It wasn't for $2 million. It was for $2,500,000. "That covers the principal, the interest, and a convenience fee for your trouble," I said. "In exchange, you sign this." Harrison slid a document across the table. It wasn't a police statement. It was a purchase of debt agreement. "You assign Gary's debt to me," I explained. "You walk away with cash, clean, no police, no FBI, no hunting me down. But if you refuse, or if I ever see you or your associates again, I will spend the remaining $47 million of my fortune hiring private mercenaries to dismantle your operation piece by piece. I won't go to the cops. I'll go to war, and I have a bigger war chest than you do." Mr. K looked at the check. He looked at the agreement. He looked at me. He saw that I wasn't bluffing. He saw a man who had already taken a bullet and destroyed his own wife in court. He picked up a pen. "A pleasure doing business, Mr. Miller," he said. He signed the paper, pocketed the check, and they walked out. Just like that, the threat was gone, vaporized by the application of capital. Harrison sat down, exhaling a breath he seemed to have been holding for 20 minutes. "You just bought Gary's debt," he said, bewildered. "Why?" "Because now," I said, picking up the signed contract, "I own Gary. When he gets out of prison in 20 years, he doesn't owe the mob, he owes Archer Consulting. And I'm going to garnish his wages until the day he dies." It was the final brick in the wall of justice. The next day we went to the Lottery Commission. I didn't wear a mask, but I didn't go as Thomas Miller. I went as the CEO of Archer Consulting. I stood at the podium, flanked by Frank and Harrison, and held up the giant check made out to the L.L.C. The reporters shouted questions about Linda, about the kidnapping, about the divorce. I answered none of them. I read a prepared statement. "Archer Consulting is pleased to accept this windfall, which will be used to fund philanthropic endeavors and strategic investments. The past is closed. The future is under construction." I took the lump sum. After taxes, it was $32 million. It hit the corporate account on a Tuesday, the same day of the week I bought the ticket. The circle was complete, but the real story isn't the money. It's what happened after the noise died down. 6 months later, the winter had thawed into spring, and I was driving my new truck, a heavy-duty pickup I bought not for show, but for hauling lumber through the old neighborhood in Westchester. I didn't live there anymore. I had bought a sprawling plot of land in the Hudson Valley, 50 acres of woods and river, and I was building a house with my own designs, a structure of glass and steel that would stand for 100 years. But I needed to close one last loop. I drove past the old Colonial. There was a for sale sign on the lawn. The grass was overgrown. The lilies were dead. Linda couldn't afford the property taxes or the upkeep on her salary well, I didn't know what she was doing and I didn't care. I parked down the street and watched. A moving truck was in the driveway. Linda came out carrying a box. She looked older. The Botox had worn off, revealing the lines of bitterness around her mouth. She looked tired. She was moving to a condo in New Jersey. I had heard through the grapevine, a downgrade. She dropped a box, spilling clothes onto the driveway, and she just stood there, staring at the mess, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She looked up and saw my truck. She couldn't see me through the tinted windows, but she knew. She stood there, waiting, maybe hoping I would get out, hoping I would save her one last time. I put the truck in gear. I didn't honk. I didn't wave. I just drove away. The rearview mirror showed her shrinking into a small, insignificant dot, and then she was gone, turned into just another memory I didn't need to carry. I drove north to the land where Frank was waiting. We were building a retreat for retired first responders, a place where cops and firefighters could come to heal, paid for by the Archer Foundation. It was the philanthropic endeavor I had promised. Frank was there, supervising the pouring of the foundation, yelling at the contractors with a joy I hadn't seen in him since before he retired. I parked the truck and walked over to him. "How's the poor VP?" I asked. "Solid as a rock, CEO," Frank grinned. "We'll be framing by next week." We stood there looking out over the valley, the sun setting over the mountains. I touched the scar on my shoulder. It didn't hurt anymore. It was just a reminder that I was made of tougher stuff than I thought. I realized then that the lottery hadn't saved me. The money was just a tool, like a hammer or a drill. It had given me the leverage to break the chains, but I was the one who had walked out of the cell. I had lost a wife who never loved me, but I had gained a brother, a purpose, and a peace that no amount of zeros in a bank account can purchase. I took a deep breath of the clean mountain air. "You know, Frank," I said, "I think I'm going to buy a boat." Frank laughed, clapping me on the back. "You get seasick in the bathtub." "Yeah," I smiled, watching the horizon, "but I can afford the Dramamine now." And as the sun dipped below the tree line, casting the world in gold, I knew that the story wasn't about the 50 million. It was about the man who survived winning it.